Well, welcome to the lesson on Judaism. I'm furthering from the last video and continuing the teaching on this particular religion. So here we have a couple symbols. This is actually a seal of Israel today in 2018. But going on, we're going to look at Judaism. This is from the Western Wall. It's the most holy place of Judaism today and has been for the last couple thousand years, basically. But you'll see a little bit about what's going on here. In our study of Judaism, we're going to be looking at Jerusalem, and that's what we have here. This is just above the Western Wall. This is the Dome of the Rock. It is not a mosque, but in this religion we see, in this picture, we see three religions. Here's a church. I don't know which one it is. Could be like the Church of the Redeemer or something like that. And there's probably a mosque there, but if not, you see another church top here. This is actually the back, the white, all that are a graveyard. That's sepulchers all around the Mount of Olives. It bends around and goes for another quarter mile on the other side there. And on the top up there and to the left of that pole and behind the flag, that's the Mount of Olives. The very top is the top of the Mount of Olives. And that would be east of what would have been the Temple Mound during the time of Solomon. But this is a holy place built by the Muslims in this 8th century or so, and this is a flag of Israel today. We have several representations and different things that remind you of Judaism. Here's the Star of David, and then we have two menorahs. These are just candlesticks. This is a temple menorah here that they would have used in the tabernacle and then later in the temple. And this is a menorah that they used for Hanukkah. It's a festival of lights that they celebrated in 164 BC when they rededicated the temple. And the Star of David is also called the Magen of David. And this is Hebrew here. That's a mu. Megan, that's Megan right there, and then David, that's what that is. Basic aim of Jewish faith is to see life, as part of your religion. Life is liturgy. So we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to go through some biblical Judaism. There are three different parts of Judaism: biblical, rabbinical, and then reformed. That's what we're now in. In the book, we start out with a term here that's called theophanies. Just want to mention this as an appearance of God, whether it be good or bad. They may be in form of angel of the Lord, and it may be some other appearance, like there appeared to be four in a fire when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in. That was called a theophany. It's not an epiphany. It's not just in the mind. It's a real figure that they can see. Then in the book it talks about the possibility of Moses and others believing in many gods, but we don't really have that in the Bible. I don't see it. The Jews don't actually teach that. But it is in the book. As far as I know, Jews have always believed in a monotheistic God. The most prominent men in Jewish ancient history and the most prominent people in Jewish studies are these three: Abraham, Moses, and David. And David being the king, Moses of the Torah, of course Abraham, the one that God visited the very first, and just starting in Genesis chapter 12. We're going to take a look at these. Okay, in Genesis, we have the first 11 chapters is the story of creation and the first 3, 4 chapters. And then it goes on, it talks about the flood in chapter 6, and where God destroys the earth because the evil of every thought of men was only on evil all the time. That's from Genesis 6, verses 1 through 5. And you can read that, but so he saved different animals, all of the animals, and Moses and his, I'm not Moses, Noah and his family. And then after they got out of the ark, people spread on the earth again. They multiplied and they built a Tower of Babel. This is a depiction of an artist thinking of what Babel might have looked like. And it was called that because then he confused their language, created different languages, and sent people all across the earth. These are the different dates of the different 3 different timelines of Jewish history. The first one is the biblical one. It goes all the way through AD 100. It's a common, CE stands for the common era. AD is kind of typical what a lot of Christians, a lot of people say in America. And I end up saying that a lot. So I'll be going between the CE and AD, meaning the same thing. BCE means the same thing as BC. It just means before the common era, and then, or before Christ, the way a lot of people. Well, at any rate, Abraham supposedly was born around 1948. That's Jewish rendition. And all the way through the time Israel became a real nation as of today, as it is today. During all that time, from the time of 586, the fall of the southern kingdom of Judah, to 1947, Israel, the people of Israel were without a place to call home, and they were pushed around. But we're going to take a look at these 3 different eras of Judaism, and especially the biblical one. It gives us a foundation for the rabbinical and the Reformed. Furthermore, in Jewish history, Abraham and his sons, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are called patriarchs. And Jacob ended up having 12 kids, and his name was changed to Israel. So Israel, Jacob became Israel, and one of his sons was Joseph, who had 2 sons named Manasseh and Ephraim. But they all became tribes of Israel, so to speak, and they are the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of Israel. I should say they are the patriarchs of Jewish history, and they'll call it patriarchal period sometime. But in Genesis chapter 12, we start out where God comes down in a theophany, some way speaks to Abraham, talks to him, and says that he would bless the world. And some people want to know how. Well, there are several different interpretations of how that has happened, but one common one used by Jews and Christians alike today is the fact that Jews have won Nobel Peace Prizes. Out of the 881 individuals, 197 of them have been Jews, which is a huge lopsided figure of the Jewish population compared to the population of the world. Jews only have not even 2% of the world's population, yet they have 22% of the Nobel Peace Prizes. The point of the Nobel Peace Prize and the different variety of ones that are given is that these individuals are helping the world promote peace and to better the world in the area of their expertise. Some of these are in medicine, some of them are in agriculture, and some in other kinds of sciences. There are some of just plain writing as well. But further in the Jewish history, besides Abraham blessing the world through him, God uses a man by the name of Moses. And Moses had 120 years on earth. And during this time, he spent 40 years kind of wandering around, growing up, I should say, growing up, the first 40, wandering around as a shepherd for the next 40 in the land of Midian, and then wandering around with the Israelites, leading them out of Egypt and getting them to the promised land. That is what comprised Moses' 120 years of life. Moses brought the people through the different plagues, the 10 different plagues, and got them through the Red Sea, built a tabernacle, wandered around because they sinned. They didn't believe God, and so Moses led them around the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for every day that the spies were out spying on their promised land. And they came, the spies, 10 of them, felt like, well, the promised land is too big for us to handle. We can't do it, and we don't believe God can help us, and so let's don't go. But 2 guys said, no, we can do. God can help us. But because of that, everyone wanted to stone these 2. God intervened by killing the people, and then said, listen, your punishment is that you are going to wander now for 40 years. So that's what they did, and that's what we find in the books of Deuteronomy and Numbers. That's what they're doing in those 2 books. The other book that was mentioned, well, that's part of the Torah, part of the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. Of course, Genesis is, Exodus is, that's where they get out of Egypt. And then there's Numbers, and there's Leviticus. And then Deuteronomy is kind of the last, it is the last one. But in the Jewish history, there are 10 commandments that God gives them, and that kind of summarize all the other commandments. There are 613 commandments in all. The commandments are mitzvahs, and they have to do with the Sabbath, with special days, with how to be clean and what they should be doing, how to pray. That's the Shema, that's a particular prayer, kosher laws and all the sacrifices, and other just daily things that they're supposed to do. These are the mitzvahs of the Old Testament, and they are written down in scrolls, and that's what we have there. And they are called, in the 613 laws are in the Torah. That's called the law, the Pentateuch, the 5 books of the law, and that's part of the scripture of the Jews. Moses was helping them understand. I mean, he's the in-between guy. He was the mediator between God and all the people of Israel. There were about 3 million people of Israel, they estimate, anywhere from 1 to 3, maybe more, maybe less, who knows, but in that neighborhood. The Torah doesn't give any evidence that the Israelites were polytheistic. However, maybe Abraham's father was, or some tradition about that, but it's not found in the Bible. It's not found in the Torah. In Exodus chapter 3, 14 and 15, in that chapter, we find God coming to Moses through a burning bush and telling him to take the people out of Egypt. They've been in slavery now for about 400 years, and you need to take them out. And Moses asked this question, well, who am I to tell, to say who sent me? Do I tell them, like a burning bush sent me, or a talking fire? That's going to really get people's attention, he's thinking. But God says, no, tell them that I am has sent you, Yahweh. So what we have here, this is Yahweh in Hebrew. Hebrew reads from right to left. This is a Yod, He, Vah, He, and it's Yahweh. And that's what this is. It's called the Tetragrammaton because there are 4 Hebrew letters that designate the name of God. This name of God is used over 6,000 times in the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. And it's called Yahweh. That's his name, kind of like my name is Doug, and you have your name. The Tetragrammaton is God's name in Hebrew. What they've done over the course of time, though, because of one of the commandments that says, do not misuse the name of the Lord thy God, don't do anything to misuse his name. So they've created a new name for him. They call him Hashem, and that means hush. Shh. Don't use his name. So when Jews use God's name, instead of saying Yahweh or writing this out, they'll write out something else or use Hashem. We'll put the capital G underline D. They won't use this Hebrew name. But at any rate, Moses went back to the people and told them, hey, God sent me and we're going to get you out of here. And they used 10 plagues to do that. They got the attention of the Egyptians, and against all of the gods of Egypt, these 10 gods at least. And by the end, the Egyptians were happy to see them leave because their livestock was dead. In fact, most of their crops were gone, and all their firstborn children were killed. And they were just happy to get the Israelites out of there. And then the Israelites left and then ended up wandering around. Deuteronomy means second giving. It's the deutero is a two, the second teaching of the law before they entered the promised land. So when the law was given, what God told Moses to do, one of the first things is to build a tabernacle for Moses to meet in, to meet God in. So we're going to start with the bottom one here. This is the Ark of the Covenant. You know, Raiders of the Lost Ark sort of thing. Well, this was, I'm going to see if I can get this Tetragrammaton off. There we go. The Ark of the Covenant is where God resided, supposedly. He lived there, and it was in the most holy place. This is just down here is just a cutout of what we have here. The tabernacle is just a tent. It's a man-made tent. God told them how to make the courtyard. It's not terribly big. The tent isn't terribly big, but you can see it's about 15 feet wide and 45 foot long. So that gives you an idea of the dimensions. And I think it's about 15 feet high as well. But this most holy place is in the back, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was, and a priest only went in that once a year. In the front of that, there was a candle. I told you that there was a temple menorah. Well, that was there. That was in the tabernacle as well. There was a table for the bread, and then there was an altar of incense in the front part called the holy place. And then out in front of that, there's a wash basin before they, after they killed the animals on the altar. There's a big brass altar out here, and they killed calves and goats and sheep and different things on for their sacrificial offerings that they were required to make. And you'll notice there's a little bit of a map here. So what's going on here is that the most holy place is always facing, I believe that's, or this opening is always east. So north is here, that would be south, that would be west, and that's east. The opening of this, it opens to the east, the sunrise. So that's important for later when we look at When they traveled and wandered around, just going to give you a little map idea here. This is Egypt. They were probably here and wandered across the Red Sea somewhere. They crossed that, and then this is called the Negev, and this is where they wandered for 40 years. And then they crossed over here and came to what we call Israel today, was their promised land. And we don't know where they crossed exactly, but somewhere along the Jordan River. The Jordan River is right from here to there, and that's all the length of the Jordan River. There's the Dead Sea in this area, and then the Sea of Galilee above. And anywhere between that they could have crossed, most likely around Jericho. Jericho is about right where the dot is right now. That would be where Jericho is. This is what the Negev looks like. It's not a real pretty sight, and it doesn't look like people could survive for 40 years living out there. But all sorts of miraculous events happened. They complained a lot, and you can kind of see why. Of course, this isn't the whole area. It's a big spot. It'd be like the size of the state of Pennsylvania or so, something like that. Here's another picture idea of what the tabernacle would look like, and that they carried this around with them for those 40 years. And when they entered the promised land, they used the tabernacle all the way through the time of David. So they used it all the way through about 1000 BC. So they used it for almost 500 years. And it gives you an idea how big the whole thing was, and a picture of a kind of a reenactment, if you will, of the tabernacle. Another thing that the Jews were asked to do is to have a daily prayer. It's called the Shema, found in Deuteronomy 6. And here are the Hebrew letters for what is here, and it's translated here. Hear, O Israel, the Eternal One is our God, the Eternal God alone. Shema Israel Adonai Elonahu Adonai Echad. Something like that. I don't do Hebrew well, but that's what these letters and words are. And what it's saying is that the Shema is the very first word here, and the idea behind it is, hear, O Israel, that the Lord God is one. He's a monotheistic God. Then right after that it says, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. But this is a daily prayer the Jews would say every morning and every evening. They usually do it at bedtime, and it's they have prayers and blessings for all kinds of things. But it lays the foundation for Jewish life. This was the first prayer taught, and they often still do it, and they call it the Shema. Some of the examples of the 613 laws are found here. Circumcision is being part of it. Shema is one. Another one that's important is to not boil their kid in its mother's milk. And that's important because when it comes to kosher laws, and I'll speak of that here in just a few minutes, they can't mix meat and milk because of this, their interpretation of it. Well, there are other part of that. And here is from the Passover. They're supposed to have certain holy days they're supposed to celebrate, and this is called the Seder plate. And this is part of their Passover celebration when God brought them out of Egypt, and they're supposed to celebrate in a certain way. And the bread that they use there is supposed to be non-leavened bread. In other words, yeast isn't supposed to be used because yeast takes a while to raise. They're supposed to use non-leavened. It's kind of like a cracker, but it doesn't have any soda in it either. They're just supposed to bake the flour and cake, make it quick. It's going to be hard and kind of crusty, but they're in a hurry, and that's what that is about. And then all the symbolism that goes with that. You can look this up. I'm not going to go through it here. But it's found in Exodus chapter 12. Then here's some things about how do Jews sanctify life. They do it with celebrations of all sorts. And there's a couple already there, and I'm add to it 4 more here. There's ritual circumcision, and then there's the bar mitzvah, which is given for girls or guys. The bar mitzvah for the guys, the bat mitzvah for the girls. It's to signify that they've reached a full adulthood and show that they are responsible now for their religious beliefs. And marriage is another life cycle celebration. Death and funerals certainly is. The Sabbath, Sabbat, different ways of pronouncing it. But that's the first day of the week, which they set aside. Is totally different than all the other days. They don't work on that day. They stay at home and do nothing. And because of this law, one of the things that identify the Jews is because of the Sabbath, they live in communities. They always have and they always will. And because of their kosher laws, they eat unique things and stay away from things. Because of those two laws, it sets them apart from most other people. And with the other things that they celebrate in their holy days throughout the year, I think this is why Jews are often recognized as not part of the culture in which they live, and they're picked on. That could be a reason why they have been persecuted over the years. The special days, I'll not make a big deal about this, but there's a lot of them. For those of you doing it, you can look them up and see. The biggest one is Shoah here that I'm going to point out. It's not the biggest one. Passover is. But Shoah is all the memorials of World War II and the Holocaust reminders and that sort of thing. That's done usually on May 1st every year. Looking at Israel from the top, looking down, what we're seeing here, it looks like just a bunch of dirt, maybe, but this is actually Jerusalem. What Jerusalem might look like in the winter. You can tell this is taken in the winter. It's not, it may be early spring. But at any rate, here is where Old Jerusalem is. You can kind of see an outline of wall, it looks like. Right, that's what this is. This is a wall around an old part of Jerusalem. During the time of Solomon, it wasn't quite that big. It was a little smaller, and it increased in size over the years. We have here then, there's a hill, a valley rather, that goes down right here. And then over here you have the Mount of Olives. And I've walked down this. And the Mount of Olives is actually right here. I walk down and across here. Well, anyway, this is the Western Wall. This is where the Jews celebrate and pray and have holy festivities sometimes, called also the Wailing Wall. They cry there because of what's happened to their temple. This is the Temple Mound. You can see here, it doesn't look very big. I'll show you a smaller or closer picture here. This is the Dome of the Rock right there. That's what that's all about. And here's what it looks like a little closer. So on this, you can see where north is. It's going straight that direction. This would be east over here. And this is the Mount of Olives. And you can walk across here and then walk down into a gate called the Lion's Gate here and get into the Old City. This right here is where the Wailing Wall, what's called the Western Wall, the most holy place for Jews today. They do not have a temple anymore. The temple that Solomon built originally was right here. But the Muslims came in and took over the Jerusalem in the 800s, and they've had it ever since, pretty much. A little bit interruptions because of other wars. But I want you to see this. This is a huge temple mound. It's the largest temple mound in ancient history. I'm going to repeat that. It is the largest temple mound in ancient history. This consists of about 36 acres. That's a lot of football fields. And this is where the actual original temple would have been for Solomon, and what he had, the courtyards and whatnot. This is just a holy place. It's called the Dome of the Rock, and this is Al-Aqsa, the actual mosque of the Islam today. Here's the temple, an artist's rendition of it. Feels like that this is where the Dome of the Rock would have been, and that's facing east here. And there's a way to get into the temple area. This is all of the temple area. And this is where the Western Wall is today, in this area right here. This is just kind of grown up with trees and whatnot. You can look at a few sites today, but this is what they think it looked like. And it was actually built by Solomon originally, rebuilt by Zerubbabel, and remodeled by Herod the Great. During the time of Jesus, it's Herod the Great that got this temple up and going, and looked kind of like what this. It was bigger and greater than either Zerubbabel or Solomon's. Herod the Great did some wonderful work, construction work for the Jews and for other people. But this gives you a little bit more specific idea about maybe the size or the way things look. And you can see here what a football field size would be in comparison. And then, so there would be some 37 nearly of these football fields on this whole area. So that's a large area. Again, it's the largest temple, ancient temple area in the world. Now there are some in other places. They're pretty good size, but none of them match this many acres. Here's the temple itself, a little up close model of what they think the temple would have looked like, and this is where they would have entered the holy place. They go in there every day and make sure that that candle is lit, make sure God has some bread in there, and then they have an altar of incense that they burn to make it smell good. And then beyond that is where they go in just once a year for their offerings. This is all by the Torah, asked of by God. And then again, just to remind you what it looked like. But going on, this is what the Temple Mound looked like when I was there. And right here is a spot. You can see that little thing there. That's what this is. It's a wash basin. It's an area to wash. Jews are really into making sure that they're clean. So you wash here and then walk on up in here. And I went to the wall and heard them praying. I even took a video and stuff. It kind of gives you an idea where everything is here. And this is the top of the Mount of Olives over here. And you can walk all the way down, then walk around. Al-Aqsa is over to the right here, the actual mosque, and then the dome. Israel is very small as a country, about the size of New Jersey. Population compared to the world is it's less than 0.5%. Not very many people live as Jews. The key elements is that God, the Torah, and Israel. The major people are Abraham, Moses, and David. The major texts are the Torah, the Tanakh, and the Talmud. The practices really are celebrations that they have, the Sabbath, and the sacrifices that they were to make, but they don't make those anymore. There are major factors for Jewish practice today, I think, are the law, that fact that they've always been persecuted and I don't know how I can go back to that slide, so I don't know if I can or not. But at any rate, there are a couple other things that are important on that we're going to be looking at some kosher laws and, of course, their everyday practice. This is just a short Jewish history of a reminder of what we went over. Once they entered the land of Canaan, we haven't gotten this far really, but then Joshua and then the judges ruled, and then there were kings. Saul was the first one, David, then all the way through the split of the north and the south, and then they went on and were exiled into Assyria and Babylon, the same place, but 150 years different. They were ruled by different people over those two times. And the split of the northern and the southern kingdom looks something like this. This is the Dead Sea. Jerusalem would be about here, and the split was just a little bit north there. And then the north part was Israel. That's what the prophets called them. And the south part was called Judah. And this is where David and Solomon both ruled. And then kings like Asa and Jehoshaphat and Hezekiah and Josiah, they ruled on the south. But evil kings like Ahab and Jezebel, they were in the north. That was man and wife team, that they were pretty evil. But that's from the split that happened because of Saul. I mean, because of David's son. But at any rate, they were exiled, and they went from, this is modern where Israel is, and they were taken out all over the world. And the Jews have been dispersed all over the world, and every time they're dispersed, they take their text, they take their tradition, they take their language, and they stay in their community. Now, while they're in exile, several things happened. One, that they learned how to worship without a temple. Because they weren't by the temple. They had to learn how to worship without priests. They created a thing called synagogue. They were kind of a mini temple, but you've heard probably about the synagogues, but they're kind of like a church building or a mosque. But they would have a Torah there. The people would go there to read and to hear some of the teachings of the Torah. And then they would meet and fellowship with other people. But during that time, this is just a timeline of other people. Are not terribly important for us, but I thought you might like to see some of these people like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were during the time of their dispersions. And it was during 1964 BC when they did the rededication, and that's where the festival called Hanukkah pops up for the very first time. Jesus actually mentions the Feast of Lights. That's what he's talking about. The birth of Christ and then the other things that happened here. The important part on this is the destruction of Jerusalem and the razing with a Z totally destroyed the temple with 1.1 million Jews, according to Josephus, were killed during this time, led by the Titus, who later became the emperor of Rome. While in exile, they not only came up with synagogues, but they have formulated ideas to separate the groups, like the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes. These are like different political groups. These four are. The Sadducees did not believe in angels. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, so therefore they were sad. You see, the Pharisees did believe in the resurrection. They did believe in angels, and they did believe in the word in a more literal sense. The Essenes were kind of private. They had their own little thoughts, but then they created community groups and lived in those. And the Zealots were kind of nationalistic. They're all for Israel, whatever happened. The Zealots got them into trouble. This lettering here is the LXX. It means the Septuagint, and it is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Tanakh, is what that's about. It's important because in Christianity, I'm just highlighting it here. The Talmud, you can read about in the textbook, but it is oral law that was written down later during the rabbinic period. When there was no more temple, they started writing these things down. The Old Testament, as Christians have it in their Bible, is what the Jews have in the Tanakh. But in that, there are several teachings like the fencing of the law, they call it. Thou shalt not boil a kid in its mother's milk, that is a baby goat. That's where they get the idea that you shouldn't put milk or cheese, so that comes from milk, cheese and meat together. And so they avoid that at all costs. So we come to kosher foods. Kosher is very important to the Jews, and that's one distinction about them and other people groups in the whole world. They are very distinct on what they can eat and what they can't eat. Ever wonder why you haven't seen a Jew in a restaurant? Well, it's because They have the Sabbath, they have kosher, and their language is unique. They don't always speak Hebrew, but they usually learn it, and that makes them very distinct. The other thing, when it comes down to kosher, the Jews have to eat kosher food prepared by a kosher cook, prepared in a kosher kitchen. No chickens cooked that I'm aware of, but chickens are cooked in a kitchen. But kosher kitchens mean that there are separate parts. There are two kitchens in a Jewish kitchen. One side for meat and one side for vegetables and milk products. Never the two shall meet. No pun intended. They cannot eat pork or any crustaceans. They can't have milk and meat products mixed. In other words, they can't have tacos as we have them. They can't have pizza as we have them. They can't eat pork, so they're not eating bacon or pork chops, chitlins or ham, pulled pork or ham hocks or pork rinds, pork ribs or sausage. And no such thing as hog heaven in a Jewish mind. But another thing they can't have is shrimp or any kind of shellfish. They can't have crab or lobster. Seafoods are very limited. They stay away from them altogether pretty much. And they can't eat catfish or shark. Any fish they eat has to have scales. So anyway, there's all sorts of descriptions what they can't eat, and they know what they are. So Jews don't eat out in public, as you and I typically know it. They just won't, because it's not prepared by a kosher cook. Now they will in Israel, and they will in their certain parts, because they'll know who they are, and they know where it'll be kosher correct. But toward rabbinical Judaism is back during the time of the temple destruction in 70 AD, about 100 AD is when the Jews started understanding that they're going to have to do something without a temple. They can't worship in a temple, it's gone. They can't sacrifice to God, so they have to make do and figure out things. Now, what do they do since sacrifices are no longer? So different people have thought through this, and Moses, Maimonides had taught on that in the medieval times, about 1000 AD or so, 1100 it seems like, in that neighborhood. He was a philosopher and a teacher of the Talmud and Torah. Throughout history, there's been a lot of reliefs, and this just means that there's a picture etched out of rock. They chip away the rock until they get this picture. And this is prominent because it's found in the Arch of Titus just outside of Rome, built by Domitian in 82 AD. And this is the exodus of the Jews from Jerusalem. And when their temple was destroyed, non-Jews took the goodies. So here is the oldest picture of the menorah we have. Well, that I'm going to say we have. There's probably older pictures and other reliefs in other places. But this is a picture of them leaving Jerusalem with this candle, this menorah. And it gives the idea of maybe the size of it. It's made of pure gold. And they were taking it to Rome so the emperor could have it. They were taking other goodies there too. And I don't know what all these things are. But that's the importance of that particular relief, and we see it here. This relief is found right here, and right here in this Arch of Titus, just outside of Rome. Reformed Judaism was practiced starting around the 19th century, the 18th century probably, when Moses Mendelssohn, it was quite a philosopher, and changing their ideas on how to practice Judaism, because they can't practice it in Israel. They're dispersed, and they're still trying to figure this out. But what he said, practice Judaism is as you want. You don't even have to have practice. And that's kind of what his, and he said you didn't even have to have faith to be a Jew. Well, that's new, but that brought on a whole new idea, concept called Reformed Judaism. And there are calendars, and different Jews have a different calendar altogether than the rest of us. And actually, I just posted this just when the date calendar changed for Jews, 5779. It was 5778 just a few days ago. And then this shows you the dates of their calendar change. They have different sects, different divisions called denominations, and we're going to ask for 4 of them: Orthodox, Reformed, Conservative, and Reconstructionists. They do a lot of celebrations. That's the big thing for Jews, is what they do. It's called orthopraxy. And during Hanukkah, that's the Festival of Lights, they use the dreidel. And there's songs about this on YouTube if you want to look them up. Kind of fun, entertaining to listen to. But they teach a lesson about Jewish life. They were the first people a ghetto was formed for. The ghetto is not for the poor in big cities. The ghetto was formed for the Jews in Rome, and has been used for them a lot, and over the years has been kind of transformed and morphed into other ways. World War II was a big changer, game changer for the Jews, because so many people were killed, and this guy Herzl and this guy Israel ben Eliezer were huge in the way that they affected certain interpretations and practices of a denomination of Jews. Herzl helped get Israel today where it is. 1948, the United Nations decided to give the land that the Jews have to them, and the rest is history. They live there today. This is where a lot of Jews were buried. This is in Prague, and it's a Jewish cemetery, and they kind of like the ghetto. They wouldn't let the Jews out, and they had to bury them in a certain place. They kept burying them on top of each other, but they kept putting in new headstones. Orthodoxy and orthopraxy is just difference between their teachings and their practice, but they're into practice. Hitler in the Holocaust did some terrible things, and they focused on the Jews. He saw them as polluters of the pure and mythical Aryan race, and suspected maybe they helped finance World War I, which crushed Germany. So he was out to get them. But we don't know if that's the only thing that Hitler had against the Jews. This star is what the Jews had to wear for years before World War II came along. Before Hitler was even around, Jews had to wear this. So they've been persecuted and singled out for hundreds, thousands of years. And one celebration that is done is called Yom HaShoah, and to remind them of the Holocaust, and to say that never again will this happen. So what I have is a few pictures for you in closing about the Holocaust and how the Jews reflect on it. One, before we get to the pictures, is you can't, in Germany and other states throughout Europe, other countries, you cannot do the Heil Hitler salute. It's incrimination. You can go to jail for that. And you can't deny the Holocaust. You'll actually be taken to one of the places like Dachau, and made to do a report on it, and stay there a few days yourself. Here's a picture of places I've been in Berlin, and this is just a Jewish community, a depiction of the family waiting to get on a train to be taken to a camp for deportation. And this is a memorial for those murdered, the Jews murdered in all of Europe. I think there are over 2,000 of these, what they call steels. It's pretty impressive sight. They're huge. But it's just a reminder of people in Berlin and throughout Europe that they shouldn't do this. And the last reminder we'll look at here are what they call tumble stones, and they put these in the sidewalks in front of the house or in front of the workplace where the Jews were extracted from and then taken to Auschwitz. In these cases, I think they were all Auschwitz, and it shows the date they were born and the date they were taken away, or possibly the date they died. Just as a reminder, once again, that Jews were treated terribly, and we should not do that. And lastly, there was a library that was burned, and the idea that freedom of thought was not allowed in Germany. Hitler hated it. You had to do it my way or no way. Might makes right principle. And the idea behind this, to finish off, is that if we squash people's thoughts and freedoms of speech, then we're doing ourselves in. It's not a good thing. At any rate, I hope you have a good better understanding of Judaism and some other things along with this. And we'll see you next time.